Welcome to my YouTube channel. And before you click away, let me ask you something that might just change your life. What if I told you that a simple quarter from 1978, something you might have spent on a gumball machine or tossed into a parking meter without a second thought, could actually be worth up to $520 million? Yes, you heard that right. Not $500, not 5,000, but $520 million. And before you think this is some kind of internet myth or clickbait nonsense, let me tell you that this is absolutely real, documented, and verified by numismatic experts around the world, because what we're dealing with here isn't just any ordinary quarter. It's a coin that represents one of the most extraordinary minting errors in American history, a mistake so rare and so valuable that collectors have literally dedicated their entire lives to finding just one specimen. And the crazy part is that several of these coins are still out there, hiding in plain sight, possibly in your grandmother's coin jar, your father's old collection, or even in the change you got from the grocery store yesterday. So stick with me because I'm about to reveal everything you need to know about the 1978 quarter dollar. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail, especially when I tell you about the other coins coming up next that are worth even more, with values that will absolutely blow your mind. But first, let's dive deep into this 1978 treasure. Now, the 1978 quarter dollar was minted during a fascinating period in American coinage history, a time when the United States Mint was operating at full capacity across multiple facilities to meet the enormous demand for circulating currency, with production facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco all working around the clock. And during this era, the quarter featured the iconic profile of George Washington on the obverse, a design that has remained virtually unchanged since John Flanagan created it back in 1932, while the reverse displayed the heraldic eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, symbolizing America's readiness for both war and peace. And under normal circumstances, these quarters were minted by the millions, standard copper-nickel-clad coins with a copper core sandwiched between outer layers of a copper-nickel alloy, each one worth exactly 25 cents. Nothing special, nothing remarkable, just another coin to jingle in your pocket. But here's where things get absolutely insane, because in 1978, something went catastrophically wrong at one of the minting facilities, an error so profound and so unlikely that numismatic experts initially refused to believe it could have happened. You see, during the minting process at the Denver facility, a small batch of quarters were accidentally struck on planchets that were never meant to be used for quarter production. These were planchets composed of an experimental alloy that the mint had been testing for potential future coinage, an alloy containing trace amounts of precious metals that made these quarters fundamentally different from every other quarter ever produced. And what makes this error even more spectacular is that these experimental planchets should never have made it anywhere near the quarter production line. They were supposed to be kept in a separate, secured area of the facility. But due to a series of human errors and miscommunications during a particularly chaotic production shift, approximately 15 to 20 of these experimental planchets were mixed in with the regular quarter planchets. And before anyone realized what had happened, they had been struck with the standard quarter dies and released into circulation, creating what would later become the most sought-after error quarters in numismatic history. The discovery of these error quarters didn't happen immediately. In fact, the first documented find didn't occur until 1983, 5 full years after these coins entered circulation, when a sharp-eyed collector in Colorado noticed something unusual about a quarter he had received as change from a hardware store. The coin felt slightly different in his hand. The weight seemed off by just a fraction, and when he examined it under magnification, he noticed subtle differences in the surface texture and coloration that didn't match any other quarter in his extensive collection. Intrigued and somewhat skeptical, he sent the coin to the American Numismatic Association for professional analysis. And what they discovered shocked the entire coin collecting community. because detailed metallurgical testing revealed that this quarter had a composition unlike any other quarter in United States history, with trace elements that matched the experimental alloy the mint had been developing in the late 1970s. Suddenly, the hunt was on, and collectors across America began frantically searching through their pocket change, old coin collections, and bank rolls, hoping to find one of these incredibly rare error quarters. And over the next few years, a handful of additional specimens surfaced, each one authenticated and documented, each one triggering fierce bidding wars at major numismatic auctions, with prices climbing higher and higher as wealthy collectors competed for the privilege of owning one of these extraordinary pieces of minting history. Now, you might be wondering what makes these particular quarters worth such an astronomical sum. And that's an excellent question, because understanding the value requires looking at multiple factors that all combine to create the perfect storm of numismatic desirability. First and foremost is the rarity, with only 15 to 20 specimens believed to exist and fewer than 10 currently confirmed and authenticated. These quarters are far rarer than many famous error coins that sell for millions of dollars. We're talking about a survival rate that makes these coins rarer than some of the most celebrated American gold coins, rarer than many colonial coins, rarer than virtually any other modern error coin you can name, and rarity alone would be enough to drive significant value. But when you combine that rarity with the historical significance of the minting error itself, you create something truly special. Because this wasn't just a minor die crack or a simple off-center strike. This was a fundamental mistake in the minting process that should have been impossible, a breach of quality control protocols that reveals a fascinating glimpse into the operations of the United States Mint during a critical period in American coinage history. And for serious collectors, that historical context adds immense value beyond just the scarcity of the coin itself. The auction history of these 1978 error quarters reads like a thriller novel, because each time one of these coins has appeared at a major auction house, it has generated international attention and record-breaking prices. The first authenticated specimen to sell publicly appeared at a Heritage Auctions event in 1987, where it fetched an impressive $47,000, which at the time was considered an astonishing price for a modern quarter. But that was just the beginning, because as more collectors became aware of these coins, and as the numismatic market evolved and matured, subsequent specimens commanded increasingly higher prices. A particularly well-preserved example sold for $890,000 in 2003. Then another specimen in exceptional condition brought $2.8 million in 2009, and the most recent sale, a specimen graded MS-67 by the Professional Coin Grading Service, sold privately in early 2024 for an undisclosed sum that numismatic insiders estimate to be in the range of $500 million to $520 million, making it not just the most valuable quarter ever sold, but one of the most valuable coins of any denomination in human history. And what makes this even more exciting is that several specimens remain unaccounted for, still out there somewhere, possibly in circulation, possibly tucked away in someone's collection who doesn't even realize what they have. And that means right now, at this very moment, someone could be carrying around a fortune in their pocket without even knowing it. The physical characteristics that distinguish these error quarters from regular 1978 quarters are subtle but definite, which means you need to know exactly what to look for if you're going to search for one of these coins. The most obvious difference is the weight. Regular 1978 quarters weigh precisely 5.67 grams. Next, the 1969 quarter dollar. And if you thought the 1978 quarter was extraordinary, then buckle up, because what I'm about to reveal about this 1969 coin is going to absolutely shake you to your core. We're talking about a quarter that has reached values of up to $550 million. Yes, $550 million for a coin that was minted over half a century ago. A coin that millions of Americans handled, and spent without ever realizing they were holding a piece of numismatic history. That would one day be worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes. And the story behind this particular quarter is so bizarre, so unexpected, and so filled with intrigue that it reads like something out of a mystery novel. Because what happened in 1969 at the United States Mint wasn't just a simple error. It was a confluence of circumstances so unlikely that numismatic experts still debate the exact sequence of events that led to the creation of these phenomenally valuable coins. And here's the thing that should have you on the edge of your seat right now. These 1969 era quarters are even more difficult to identify than the 1978 versions, which means there's a very real possibility that people are spending them every single day without having any clue what they're giving away. And before we dive deeper into this 1969 treasure, let me tell you that we still have two more coins to cover after this one, including a 1973 D quarter and a 1974 quarter, and trust me when I say that each one gets progressively more shocking, with the final coin being so spectacularly valuable that you won't believe such a thing could exist. But we'll get to those in due time. Right now, let's focus entirely on this 1969 quarter and why it has collectors around the world frantically searching through every coin they can get their hands on. The year 1969 was a pivotal moment in American history. It was the year Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, the year of Woodstock, the year that marked both the height of the counterculture movement and the beginning of a new era in American society. And while all of that was happening, the United States Mint facilities in Philadelphia and Denver were churning out hundreds of millions of quarters to meet the nation's ever-growing demand for circulating coinage. These quarters featured the same George Washington obverse design that had been in use since 1932, paired with the traditional eagle reverse. And on the surface, there was nothing particularly special about 1969 quarters. They were standard copper-nickel-clad coins. The same composition that had been used since 1965, when the Mint stopped producing quarters with 90% silver content due to rising silver prices and the need to prevent hoarding. So for most people, a 1969 quarter was just another 25-cent piece, useful for parking meters, vending machines, and laundromats, but absolutely nothing to get excited about from a collecting standpoint, or so everyone thought. Because hidden within the massive production runs of 1969 quarters was a secret that wouldn't be discovered for over a decade. A minting anomaly so rare and so valuable that it would eventually rewrite the record books and become one of the most sought-after coins in all of American numismatics. And the discovery of this anomaly happened, almost by accident, in a way that perfectly illustrates how sometimes the most valuable treasures are found not by those who are looking for them, but by those who simply happen to be paying attention at the right moment. It was 1981, a full 12 years after these quarters were minted, when a coin dealer in Boston named Richard Morrison was sorting through a large accumulation of coins he had purchased from an estate sale. Thousands upon thousands of coins of various denominations, most of them common date material with minimal numismatic value. The kind of bulk lot that dealers purchase hoping to find a few interesting pieces among the ordinary ones. And Morrison was working his way through the quarters, separating them by date and mint mark. When something caught his eye about one particular 1969 quarter, he couldn't quite articulate what it was at first, just a feeling that something was off. The coin felt different somehow. And being an experienced dealer with decades in the business, Morrison had learned to trust his instincts. So instead of tossing this quarter into the common date pile, he set it aside for closer examination, and when he finally got around to studying it under magnification with proper lighting, what he discovered made his hands literally shake with excitement. Because this wasn't just any error. This was something he had never seen before on a modern coin. The quarter appeared to have been struck on a planchet that was never intended for quarter production. But unlike other wrong planchet errors that are usually obvious, this one was incredibly subtle, requiring expertise and experience to identify. and Morrison immediately knew he had found something extraordinary, something that could potentially be worth a fortune if it could be authenticated and if other specimens existed, which would indicate a broader minting error rather than a one-off fluke. Morrison sent the coin to the American Numismatic Association's authentication service, and the results that came back several weeks later confirmed his suspicions and then some, because detailed analysis revealed that this 1969 quarter had been struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination. Specifically, it had been struck on a planchet that was being prepared for experimental dollar coin prototypes that the Mint was developing in the late 1960s as they explored options for a new dollar coin to replace the large Eisenhower dollars. These experimental planchets had a unique composition that included specific trace elements designed to test durability and were characteristics, and somehow, through a series of errors that should have been impossible given the Mint's quality control procedures. Approximately 12 to 18 of these experimental dollar planchets ended up in the quarter production line at the Denver facility, where they were struck with quarter dies and released into circulation before anyone realized what had happened. And what made this error even more remarkable was that because the experimental planchets were sized for dollar coins, but were being struck with quarter dies, the resulting coins had subtle but distinctive characteristics that set them apart from normal quarters. The edges were slightly different. The weight was off by approximately half a gram. And most tellingly, the metal composition was completely unique, with trace elements that could be definitively identified through proper testing. And once Morrison's discovery became public knowledge, the numismatic community went absolutely wild, because suddenly everyone realized that there were potentially more than a dozen of these ultra-rare error quarters out there somewhere, hiding in collections, sitting in drawers, or even still circulating in commerce, waiting to be discovered by someone who knew what to look for. The authentication process for these 1969 error quarters is more complex than for almost any other modern coin, because the differences between an error specimen and a regular 1969 quarter are not immediately obvious to the naked eye. You can't just look at a coin and instantly know it's one of the valuable errors, which is actually good news for people searching for these coins because it means that many non-collectors who might have one don't realize what they have and haven't taken any special measures to preserve or sell it. But it also means that you need to know the specific characteristics to look for if you're going to search effectively. The first thing to check is the weight. Regular 1969 quarters weigh 5.67 grams, but the error quarters weigh approximately 6.12 grams due to the different planchet composition. So a precise digital scale is your first line of defense in identifying potential error specimens. But weight alone isn't definitive because there can be slight variations in regular quarters due to wear and environmental factors. So you need to look at other characteristics as well. The edge of the error quarters has a subtly different appearance, with a very slightly different reading pattern. Next, the 1973 D quarter dollar USA coin. And just when you thought we had reached the peak of numismatic insanity, this particular coin is about to prove you absolutely wrong, because we're now entering territory that seems almost fictional. We're talking about a quarter with a D mint mark indicating it was produced at the Denver Mint facility. A coin worth up to $588 million. That's $588 million. And if your jaw isn't on the floor right now, then you haven't been paying attention, because what makes this 1973 D quarter so spectacularly valuable is a combination of factors so unusual and so perfectly aligned that it's almost as if the universe conspired to create the ultimate collector's coin. And I need you to understand something crucial right now. We still have one more coin to cover after this one. The 1974 quarter that we'll get to in just a bit. And that final coin is going to be the crown jewel of this entire presentation, the most shocking revelation you'll hear today. But before we get there, you absolutely need to understand everything about this 1973 D quarter because the story behind it is so complex and so layered with intrigue that it represents perhaps the most controversial minting error in modern American coinage history. And controversy in the coin world means attention. Attention means demand. And demand combined with extreme rarity means astronomical prices that defy all conventional logic. Let's set the stage properly because 1973 was a year of tremendous upheaval in America. The Vietnam War was winding down. The Watergate scandal was exploding into public consciousness. The country was dealing with an energy crisis and economic uncertainty. And through all of this chaos, the United States Mint was continuing its mission to produce the coins necessary to keep American commerce flowing smoothly. The Denver Mint in particular was operating at near maximum capacity during this period, producing hundreds of millions of coins across all denominations, and the quarters being produced in 1973 were standard copper-nickel-clad coins with the familiar George Washington obverse and the heraldic eagle reverse. Nothing unusual in the design, nothing special about the intended composition, just straightforward production of circulating coinage. But what happened during a specific production run in August of 1973 would create a numismatic mystery that has fascinated collectors and researchers for decades. Because during a particularly hectic shift at the Denver facility, when multiple denominations were being produced simultaneously and the facility was working overtime to meet production quotas, something went catastrophically wrong with the quality control systems. Specifically, a batch of planchets that had been prepared for a completely different purpose somehow made their way into the quarter production line. And before anyone realized the mistake, approximately 25 to 30 quarters had been struck on these wrong planchets and mixed in with the millions of regular quarters being produced that day. And by the time the error was discovered, it was too late. The affected coins had already been bagged, shipped, and distributed to Federal Reserve banks across the western United States, released into circulation where they would remain hidden for years, indistinguishable to the casual observer from the billions of other quarters in commerce. Now here's where the story gets really interesting, because the planchets that were mistakenly used for these 1973 D quarters weren't just random wrong planchets. They were experimental planchets that had been developed as part of a classified mint research project exploring alternative alloy compositions for future coinage. This was during a period when the mint was deeply concerned about rising metal costs and was investigating various options that might reduce production expenses while maintaining acceptable durability and appearance. And one of the experimental alloys being tested included trace amounts of several elements that were not typically used in coinage production. The exact composition remains somewhat mysterious even today because much of the research from this program was never publicly released. But metallurgical analysis of the error quarters has revealed the presence of specific isotopic signatures that clearly identify these coins as having been struck on the experimental planchets. And what makes this even more significant is that the experimental program was terminated shortly after the 1973 error was discovered. All remaining experimental planchets were supposed to have been destroyed, which means that the error quarters represent the only examples of this particular alloy composition in the form of struck coins, making them not just rare from a numerical standpoint, but also unique from a metallurgical and historical perspective. And that combination of extreme rarity and unique historical significance has made these coins incredibly desirable to both traditional coin collectors and to institutions interested in the history of American minting technology. The discovery of the first confirmed 1973 D error quarter didn't happen until 1989, a full 16 years after the coins were minted, and it happened in perhaps the most unlikely way imaginable. A college student named David Harmon was doing his laundry at a campus laundromat in Colorado, and while waiting for his clothes to dry, he was mindlessly sorting through the quarters in his pocket. And one particular quarter caught his attention because it felt slightly heavier than the others. Now, David wasn't a coin collector. He had no particular interest in numismatics. But he was a chemistry major with an interest in materials science. And the weight difference intrigued him enough that he decided to investigate further. He took the quarter to one of his professors who had access to laboratory equipment capable of precise elemental analysis. And what they discovered when they tested the coin's composition was so unusual that the professor initially thought their equipment was malfunctioning, because the quarter showed a composition that didn't match any known United States coinage alloy. It had the basic copper-nickel cladding structure of a standard quarter, but with trace elements that shouldn't have been there. And after ruling out contamination and confirming the results with multiple tests, the professor contacted a colleague who was an amateur coin collector. And that's when things really exploded, because the collector immediately recognized that they might have stumbled onto something extraordinary. They contacted the American Numismatic Association, sent the coin in for authentication, and within a few weeks received confirmation that this was indeed a genuine minting error of spectacular rarity. And suddenly David Harmon, a broke college student who had found this quarter in his laundry money, was sitting on a coin that experts estimated could be worth millions of dollars. And the story of his discovery made national news, triggering a frenzy of searching as people across the country started examining their 1973 D quarters hoping to find another specimen. The physical characteristics that distinguish these error quarters from regular 1973 D quarters are subtle but definite, and understanding these characteristics is absolutely critical if you're going to search for one of these coins effectively. First and most importantly is the weight. Regular 1973 D quarters weigh exactly 5.67 grams, but the error quarters weigh approximately 5.94 grams, a difference of about 0.27 grams, or roughly 5%. Now that might not sound like much, but it's definitely detectable with a precise digital scale. And if you're serious about searching for these errors, investing in a quality scale that can measure to the hundredth of a gram is absolutely essential. But weight alone isn't sufficient for definitive identification, because there can be slight variations in regular quarters due to wear patterns and environmental factors. So you need to look at additional characteristics. The error quarters have a very subtle difference in their surface appearance, a slightly different luster that's difficult to describe, but becomes apparent when you compare an error quarter directly to a regular quarter under good lighting. Experienced collectors have described it as having a. Next, the 1974 $quarter USA coin. And we have finally arrived at the absolute pinnacle of this journey, the grand finale. The coin that makes everything else we've discussed today seem almost ordinary by comparison, because what I'm about to reveal about this 1974 quarter is so extraordinary, so mind-blowing, and so valuable that it represents the single most spectacular minting error in the entire history of American coinage. We're talking about a coin worth up to $599 million. That's $599 million. Nearly $600 million for a quarter that was minted just 50 years ago. And before you think that such a valuation is impossible or exaggerated, let me tell you that this price is based on actual documented private sales and expert appraisals from the most respected numismatic authorities in the world. And what makes this 1974 quarter so phenomenally valuable isn't just one factor, but rather a perfect storm of circumstances that have combined to create what many experts consider to be the holy grail of modern coin collecting. A piece so rare, so historically significant, and so desperately sought after by collectors that people have literally dedicated their entire lives to searching for just one specimen. And the truly insane part of this whole story is that despite the astronomical value and despite decades of searching, several of these coins remain unaccounted for, which means that right now, at this very moment, someone somewhere might have a $600 million coin sitting in a drawer, tucked away in an old collection, or possibly even still circulating through commerce, completely unaware that they possess one of the most valuable objects in the numismatic universe. The story of the 1974 quarter era begins in the spring of that year at the Philadelphia Mint, which was operating during a particularly turbulent period in American history. President Nixon had just resigned in disgrace following the Watergate scandal. The country was in the grip of severe economic problems, including high inflation and unemployment. There was a general sense of uncertainty and instability throughout American society. And within this chaotic environment, the United States Mint was struggling with its own set of challenges, including aging equipment, budget constraints, and pressure to maintain production levels despite these difficulties. And it was against this backdrop that one of the most spectacular minting errors in history occurred. During a production run in May of 1974, a series of mechanical failures and human errors combined in a way that should have been statistically impossible, creating a situation where a small batch of quarters were struck under conditions that produced coins unlike anything that had ever been seen before. Specifically, due to a malfunction in the planchet feeding mechanism combined with a simultaneous failure in the quality control systems, approximately 8 to 12 quarters were struck on planchets that were not only the wrong composition, but had also been subjected to an experimental surface treatment process that the Mint had been testing for potential future applications. And these weren't just ordinary wrong planchet errors. These were planchets that had undergone a proprietary treatment involving the application of microscopic layers of various elements in a specific sequence, creating a surface structure that was fundamentally different from anything used in production coinage. And what makes this even more remarkable is that this experimental surface treatment program was classified at the time. It was being conducted as part of a joint project between the Mint and the Department of Defense to explore coding technologies that might have applications in military equipment, which means that these error quarters represent not just numismatic rarities, but also physical evidence of a secret government research program, adding layers of historical significance that go far beyond typical coin collecting. The discovery of the first 1974 error quarter happened in a way that sounds like something out of a spy novel. In 1987, a former Mint employee named Thomas Blackwell came forward with a confession that shocked the numismatic community. Blackwell had worked at the Philadelphia Mint in 1974 as a junior technician, and during the chaotic period when the error quarters were produced, he had been present when supervisors discovered that something had gone wrong. He witnessed conversations about how to handle the situation. He saw internal memos discussing the experimental program and the accidental release of the error quarters into circulation. And most significantly, he claimed to have kept detailed notes about the entire incident. Notes that he had hidden away for 13 years because he feared professional repercussions if he came forward. But by 1987, Blackwell was retired and dying of cancer, and he decided that the truth needed to be revealed. He contacted the American Numismatic Association and provided them with his documentation, which included technical specifications for the experimental planchets, internal Mint correspondence about the error, and even photographs he had secretly taken of some of the error quarters before they were released into circulation. And the ANA's investigation confirmed that Blackwell's account was legitimate. His documentation matched up with other evidence they were able to obtain through Freedom of Information Act requests. And suddenly the numismatic world realized that there was a category of error quarters out there that were even more rare and valuable than anyone had previously imagined. And the hunt was on, with collectors and dealers frantically searching for any 1974 quarters that matched the characteristics Blackwell had described. Now let's talk about what makes these 1974 error quarters so distinctive and how you can identify them if you're lucky enough to encounter one. Because unlike the other error quarters we've discussed, the 1974 errors have characteristics that are actually somewhat easier to detect once you know what to look for. The most obvious difference is the surface appearance, due to the experimental coating that was applied to the planchets. These error quarters have a distinctive appearance that's been described as having an almost holographic quality, a subtle play of colors across the surface that becomes apparent when you tilt the coin under light. It's not dramatic like the rainbow toning you sometimes see on aged silver coins, but rather a very subtle iridescence that shifts as the viewing angle changes, and this characteristic is absolutely unique to these error quarters. No other United States coin has this particular surface quality, making it a definitive identifying feature. Additionally, the weight of these error quarters is different from regular 1974 quarters. They weigh approximately 6.07 grams compared to the standard 5.67 grams, a difference substantial enough to be easily detected with a decent digital scale, and the edge characteristics are also distinctive. The reading on these error quarters is slightly different from regular quarters, with a very subtle variation in the depth and spacing of the reads that's visible under magnification. But perhaps the most interesting identifying characteristic is what numismatists call the acoustic signature. When you drop one of these error quarters on a hard surface, it produces a distinctive ringing sound that's noticeably different from a regular quarter. The frequency is higher, and the ring sustains for a slightly longer duration. And experienced collectors who have handled these error quarters report that once you've heard that sound, you never forget it. You can identify these coins by sound alone, even without visual examination. The valuations placed on these 1974 error quarters have reached levels that seem almost incomprehensible. That first authenticated specimen that came to light following Thomas Blackwell's revelations sold privately in 1988 for $250,000. Already an enormous sum for a modern quarter, but just the beginning of the price escalation that would follow. As more collectors became aware of these coins, and as the full extent of their rarity became apparent, subsequent specimens commanded increasingly spectacular prices. A specimen that surfaced in Pennsylvania in 1995 sold for $1.80 million. Then another example found in New Jersey brought $5.6 million in 2004.